How did a 6th century church manage to define architecture for the next 1,000 years? Did the Greeks build the world's largest dome 1800 years before Hagia Sophia? How does a 6th century dome stack up against the massive structures of the Renaissance? Which European church stole the title of the largest church from Hagia Sophia? Which modern mosque changed the Istanbul skyline just a few years ago? And which really is the largest church on the planet? So stick around until the end because I'm going to reveal some very interesting information about which building actually holds the world records today. It has broken every previous record and you won't believe where it is. So let's compare Hagia Sophia with the great Ottoman mosques and the massive cathedrals of the West. Welcome to Not Another Greek History Podcast, the podcast that aims to be exactly what it says. I'm your host, Onoufiros Dovletis, and together we'll discover the not so frequently told stories of Greece's history that will change the way you view things forever. In Greek, by the way, we just say Hagia without the H in the beginning, but that has to do with ancient Greek. So Hagia Sophia, Saint Wisdom, was built in just 5 years, around 532, by the Greek architects Isidoros and Anthemios. Right before that, Justinian, the Roman emperor, ordered another smaller temple to be built, another church to be built close to the famous Hagia Sophia that we all know today. It is the one that we call Little Hagia Sophia, the Church of Saints Sergius and Bacchus. Without that test run, because that's what it really was, they might have not have had the guts to build the real thing. It's like Justinian ordered a pilot project to see if his vision would collapse on him or make history. And his decision was proven right. The dome of Hagia Sophia was 31 meters wide and 56 meters high. The windows at the base make it look like the dome is just floating in the air. For over 1,000 years, it was the ultimate tech miracle. Even after the dome collapsed in an earthquake in 558, they just rebuilt it higher and lighter. By 1453, when the Turks took over the city, Hagia Sophia was already 900 years old and became the gold standard for every mosque. So let's see which are the great mosques that tried to rival, let's say, the Church of Hagia Sophia. Süleymaniye, built roughly in 1550, that is roughly a century after the Turks have taken over the city. It was designed by the great architect Sinan for the Sultan Süleyman. I almost said emperor, by the way. Okay, it's not very different, obviously. But keep in mind, although we call them sultans, the Turkish emperors actually called themselves emperors of the Romans. So they saw themselves practically as a continuation of the Roman Empire. Byzantium, Constantinople, was actually Eastern Roman Empire. So the dome of Süleymaniye is 53 meters high, slightly lower than Hagia Sophia, but its diameter is only 27 meters. Sinan was clever. He knew, by the way, that the oil lamps would create tons of soot, so he built a very advanced system to trap the smoke and turn it into high-quality ink for the calligraphers. That's very, very interesting, mind-blowing. Then we get to Selimiye, which is not in Constantinople or modern-day Istanbul. It's in the city that we call Adrianoupoli, the city of Hadrian, but the Turks called it Edirne. So this actually was Sinan's masterpiece, and it was built around 1570, more or less. Sinan was pretty old by then. He was roughly 80 years old, and he died almost 100. The dome is 31.8 meters wide. We have to be very precise about this because Hagia Sophia, we said, is 31. So 31.2, he narrowly beat Hagia Sophia. He reportedly shouted, "I have defeated you," just like Justinian had actually shouted, "I have outdone you, Solomon," referring to the temple of the Jews, the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. And that's when he saw Hagia Sophia finished. And then we get to the Blue Mosque, or Sultan Ahmed. And that is the mosque that actually the area is named after. In that part, we have the Blue Mosque and Hagia Sophia. So as you can see, although Hagia Sophia had been there for much, much, much longer before the Blue Mosque, which only dates from the 1600s, the Turks, of course, named the area after the mosque. So it's called Sultan Ahmed. It was built right across from Hagia Sophia, obviously to compete with it, but the dome is actually much smaller. The diameter is only 23.5 meters. So now we're going to get to the modern rivals of Hagia Sophia, because during those times of the Ottoman Empire, the Turks actually never surpassed Hagia Sophia. By the way, don't forget to rate the podcast so that more people can find it. Don't be selfish. I know you love it, but don't keep it to yourselves. And if you're listening through my website, again, I'm going to say please pause right now and take a few seconds to follow my podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, because that is the best way to make sure that you never miss an episode. So now back to those records. All of Hagia Sophia's historical records actually were broken in Turkey very recently. The Çamlıca Mosque opened in 2019 and is now the largest one in Turkey. The architect that influenced, of course, its modern architecture was Sinan. Mimar Sinan was likely of Greek or Armenian origin and probably named Joseph. There have been many other theories about where he might have been from. I guess we're never going to know. The Turks, though, tried to find out, and roughly a century ago, they dug up Sinan's skull to prove that it was Turkish through measurements. It's hard to imagine, though, what they expected to find from a former janissary, and janissary actually means a boy that was not Turkish and that had been kidnapped from some other nationality when he was maybe 8 years old, and he was raised as a Turk and probably became Muslim. That was the idea. And of course, that would have been a soldier, a janissary, who would eventually fight maybe against his own people, against his own family. That's why keep in mind that a lot of Turks nowadays have non-Turkish DNA. So I think that was kind of risky from the side of the Turks to even dare, I'm going to say, to try and prove that a person who lived in the 1600s actually was a real Turk. The real Turks actually come from Asia. They look much more like Chinese, Mongolian than they look Mediterranean, which they do nowadays. So back to the dome of Çamlıca Mosque. It's 34 meters wide and 72 meters high. We said Hagia Sophia is 31 meters wide, so 34, they surpassed it, and 72 meters high. That height symbolizes the 72 nations living in Istanbul. And what a multicultural city, and how much the Turks actually love other nations. As I just said, they tried to prove that he was not from another nation. And because, of course, they love other nations that had been living in that part of the planet for thousands of years, like the Greeks, and whom they took over. So a few decades ago, out of that great love for other nations, Turkey organized a pogrom against the Greeks of the city. I've talked about this in 2 episodes. I'll put them in the description. I think it's worth listening to. Now, the minarets of the Chamlija Mosque are 107.1 meters tall, very precise, and you're going to see why. 107.1. That is a nod to the Battle of Manzikert, which took place in 1071, where the Turks first defeated Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire. They even captured the emperor himself. So, of course, as you can see, they think of everything. Again, I've done an episode about that, so make sure that you listen to that as well. So this is the mosque that really surpasses Hagia Sophia, but it was only, as I told you, in 2019. Hagia Sophia was used as a mosque, of course, during the Ottoman Empire, but it became a museum in 1923 by Mustafa Kemal. That is the guy that you see practically everywhere in banners, in posters. He's like a religious figure. He's not, but I mean, it looks like a religious figure everywhere in Turkey. Despite being a World Heritage Site now, Hagia Sophia was turned back into a mosque in 2020, which is weird because they had just built the mosque that really surpassed Hagia Sophia, and that was done by Erdogan, the president of Turkey, without warning. What was UNESCO's reaction? Because we said it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It was a mild annoyance and nothing else. Typical. The thing is that UNESCO should have been notified, and the thing is that the Turks actually allow access into the main area only to Muslims, even during times when there's no prayers. And again, I'm going to say it's a World Heritage Site, not just for Muslims. I know it's in a Muslim country. The Turks can do whatever they want with it, of course. It's theirs practically now. But, I mean, come on. It should be accessible to everyone and not just the upper part as it is right now and where we even pay a ticket. As I said, based on all the symbolisms from the Chamlija Mosque, the 72 nations, the 107.1 meters, the minarets, Turkey has its nationalistic agenda and leaves nothing to chance. In some spots in Hagia Sophia, the signs refer to things built by the Turks inside the church as masterpieces, whereas the indisputable masterpieces in the church are the Christian mosaics. And another sign mentions that Emperor Constantine the Great founded Istanbul. The emperor founded New Rome, which became known as Constantinople after his name, so the city, the polis of Constantine, and that's what we Greeks call it to this day. Then the Turks renamed it Istanbul roughly a century ago. So it's intentionally misleading to say that a Roman emperor founded a Turkish city, whereas it actually was a Greek city to begin with. It was the city of Byzantium. Now let's get to the West and see how Hagia Sophia compares to the Western giants. The first dome in Western Europe that actually really surpasses Hagia Sophia is the Cathedral of Florence, a dome designed by Brunelleschi in 1436. It reached 45 meters in diameter and surpassed Hagia Sophia by far. 31 for Hagia Sophia, 45 for Santa Maria del Fiore. It didn't just surpass Hagia Sophia though, it also surpassed another building. It surpassed the Pantheon in Rome. Let's not forget that the Romans, with a Greek architect, built a very impressive building in 126 AD. By the way, Pantheon in Rome, Parthenon in Athens. Okay, I'm just saying, because many people tell me that they want to see the Pantheon in Athens. The dome of the Pantheon, which means all gods in Greek, is 43.3 meters wide and 45 for Florence So as you can see, Brunelleschi just surpassed the Pantheon after 1300 years, roughly by 1.7 meters. Those square things that you see, by the way, in the ceiling of the Pantheon reduce the weight, and that's actually a technique that you would see when you visit the Acropolis in Athens. That's why I do say that there is an order in which sites, places should be visited. I know Greece is never in your in the top of your freaking bucket list. It's always Italy, it's always France. Greece comes a little bit later, but actually it should be the other way around for history's sake only if you're interested in that. Otherwise you would get confused. But here's the shocker. There was something much older than the Pantheon. There was actually the biggest dome on the planet before the Pantheon. Built around 1250 BC, the Pantheon is AD, 2nd century AD. This is the 13th century BC. In Mykines, Mycenae in Greece, this was the largest dome in the world for over 1,000 years. It is 1,400 years older than the Pantheon and 1,800 years older than Hagia Sophia. It actually even used a 120-ton stone over its entrance, which is heavier than anything in Hagia Sophia and one of the heaviest stones used in the history of mankind. And it was built without any cement, and it's still standing, and you should visit it. Mykines, Mycenae, the kingdom of Agamemnon, who was the king in charge of the Greek army in the Trojan War. So that's what we're talking about. And then we get to St. Peter's Church in Rome, in the Vatican. This dome was designed by Michelangelo, and it's 42 meters wide. It's 3 meters smaller, narrower than the dome in Florence. St. Peter's is the largest church by area in the world, but it's second in capacity behind the Cathedral of Seville in Spain. Hagia Sophia is actually 19th. As you can see, regarding capacity has been surpassed by many other churches. The largest church, by the way, in Greece is St. Andrew in Patra, 2 hours from Athens in the south, whereas the largest Orthodox church in the world is in Romania. I think you would have guessed maybe Russia, but no, it's in Romania. So now the final plot twist. I promised you an intriguing piece of information for the end. Hopefully you've made it this far. So if you think St. Peter's in Rome is the largest church in the world today, you're wrong. Since 1989, the record belongs to the Basilica of Our Lady of Peace, which is in Yamoussoukro, and that is in Ivory Coast. Its dome is 158 meters high and 90 meters wide. 90 meters wide. That's more than double St. Peter's Dome. Nevertheless, its capacity is only about 18,000 people. St. Peter's is roughly 60,000, and the one in Seville, which we said is the largest one in the world, is roughly 80,000 people. And this one in the Ivory Coast is roughly 18,000 people. But it has by far the biggest dome on the planet. Imagine that. Justinian, Sinan, Michelangelo, Brunelleschi fighting over who has the biggest dome, only to be totally outdone by some unknown city in Africa. Talk about historical irony. Hagia Sophia was and is the ultimate symbol of Constantinople and modern-day Istanbul, even though the Turks like to promote their own mosques. But this church wasn't just the biggest church in the world until the 1400s. It was 1,000 years ahead of its time. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share. Until next time, this is Onufrios Dovletis signing off from Not Another Greek History Podcast.